Today we're going to have a conversation about strategic alignment. This is kind of a key one. We're going to talk a little bit about why it matters, some of the challenges, some of the reasons it's difficult, and show use the software really just to kind of show how you can achieve strategic alignment much more effectively than perhaps is normal and traditional. So we're going to cover why, how, and then just look at it a little bit in the context of prioritizing projects. As I said earlier, do jump onto the chat and ask questions. It's a small group, so we'll probably handle them as we go along. And we thought that a really good way of kicking off this session would be to talk about a customer. So Dan, I'm going to hand over to you. I see you've muted your line, which probably means I've just caught you by surprise there.
I'm still here.
Excellent. So we're going to talk a little bit about the RNLI and sort of how we help them achieve their goals. And you interviewed them a little while ago, right?
Yeah, shameless plug for our website, but jump on to us at transparentchoice.com, have a look at the resources page, and you'll find some case studies. So one of my favorites was with Jody, who heads up the decision support area for RNLI. And he's long time AHP user, a friend of the company. But Jody's got some fantastic stories about how he used the software in order to bring structure, order, and agility to the way that they manage. I think it's predominantly the kind of engineering backlog at the RNLI. The RNLI, for the non-UK folks, is the group who do fantastic work patrolling our waters for our safety. So rescuing people from the sea, I think, predominantly, which, as an island, is a very important sort of service that they provide. So, what they do does make a difference. Jody talked about initially using the software to kind of drive strategic alignment through kind of consulting with the high, the senior folks, and then bringing in subject matter experts in order to create this very, very strong framework for prioritization. And I think particularly interesting, he did this kind of going into the times of COVID. So was then able to use that framework to pivot very quickly, kind of post-COVID, when we had a sort of furlough scheme here in the UK where a lot of folks were at home for sort of 6 months plus, and using that kind of the strategic alignment built pre-COVID in order to reprioritize going back, in order to adapt their backlog very, very quickly in a way that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise.
And one of the things that he talks about is how it's a process. It's not just it's not an event, it's not a target, it's a process for creating strategic alignment. And hopefully that'll come out a little bit later on as we go through this. But I thought it might be interesting just to start and just sort of ask, we're thinking about alignment primarily here in the context of project portfolios. Right. So we could have a whole discussion about what is strategic alignment, and actually there's a slide later on where we'll talk about it at the corporate level. But what is strategic alignment in the context of project portfolios? Well, this is what it's not. Right. This is often when people think about strategy, they think about these grand mission statements that companies put out there. And I shamelessly found this online somewhere today, so I haven't validated all of these, but I thought this one was especially wonderful and clear. So Harley Davidson's vision statement is to fulfill dreams of personal all-American freedom. Now, I have absolutely no idea what that means, and I'm sure you don't either. Specifically, I have no idea how to turn that into an action plan, into a set of things that we actually do. It makes you feel nice. It's kind of a lovely phrase. It's a lovely saying, but it doesn't actually tell us what we're going to do. So we need to, if we're going to think about strategically aligning portfolios, we need to get below that level, right? So we need something to aim at. And so lots of people think that it's a little bit like this. There's a target, there is actually a thing called strategic alignment. And it's that circle right in the middle there. And we're just got to shoot and hit the circle and we're done. And the problem with one problem with strategic alignment in the context of project portfolios is it's not that simple. There isn't just one goal that is strategic alignment. Strategic alignment is this sort of complicated mixture of things. It's a balance of different goals, different things that you try to achieve, different things that are important. And you have to kind of find the right balance between them. And what makes it really difficult is that in most organizations, it's not clear what that balance is, right? It's not nicely focused. It can be rather foggy. But it really matters. And I'll give you a couple of statistics just to help with this. So strategic alignment is often one of those things. You know, people go off and they do their PMO certification classes, and they learn about strategic alignment being one of the things that you need to do. And it's one of the things you need to talk about and be able to answer questions on to get your certification and all that kind of good stuff. But that's not the point. Right? The point of doing projects at all is to help the organization move to where it wants to be, to deliver the services, to deliver profitability, whatever it is that you do. The point of doing projects is to get you from where you are today to where you want to be strategically. So given that, it's kind of surprising to me that according to the PMI, 1 in 5 projects in a typical portfolio are so badly aligned with the strategic goals of the business that they should be stopped tomorrow, right? So it's not that they're just a little bit aligned. They're just so badly aligned they should be stopped tomorrow. And at the same time, half of projects are under-resourced. And again, that was PMI data from the same study. So there's something going on here where organizations are clearly finding it quite difficult to identify the projects that do support their strategy, you know, to align the portfolio with that strategy, and then to allocate their resources to the projects that really matter. And just coming to, I saw Erica on there, right? So Erica, you're at the house doing really important work there. That bottom statistic is taken from research into government departments, and they looked at the degree of strategic alignment and the overall effectiveness of that department, the overall performance of the department. And what they found was that strategic alignment explains 80% of the difference between high-performing government departments and low-performing government departments. So this particular study was looking at government departments. There are other studies that looks at corporates. There's one I can think of where they looked at the combination of strategic alignment plus buy-in, and between them they accounted for 90% of the difference between top performers and bottom performers. So this strategic alignment thing, if we can figure out how to measure it, we should be able to improve on this 20% number. And because we're talking about projects here, if we could just boost that, reduce this number by 5%, right, we're going to get 5% more value. But the fun thing about projects is that generally, especially if it's an IT project or something, or a productivity project, you don't just get that value on the year you deliver it. That value stays for years to come, right? So if you put in a new IT system and it saves you $1 million a year, it's going to save you $1 million this year, and $1 million next year, and $1 million the year after, and $1 million the year after, right? So that's nice, that's good value. But of course, if you do that the next year again, and each year you add 5%, by the time you get 5-6 years down the line, you're actually, as an organization, getting 30% more value from the investment that you've made over that time. So this all feels rather academic, and sure, that happens. Well, McKinsey did some research that looked at the strategic portfolio. So that, the top level of the organization, what business are we in, and where do we put our investments moving forward? And what they discovered is that cumulatively, so over a number of years, organizations that proactively, in a structured way, deliberately aligned their strategic portfolio with their organizational goals were worth a staggering 40% more than companies that didn't do that. Okay, so taking care of strategic alignment, and it's cumulative, it happens over years. So the first year there wasn't a big difference, second year a bigger difference, third year a bigger difference. So if you look, kind of 10 years down the line, those that do a good job of this were worth 40% more than the companies that didn't. So that's colossal. Now, I'm not claiming that that's all project prioritization, because that particular study looked at strategic alignment a little bit higher up in the organization, sort of at the corporate level. But it just shows you the impact that that really focusing on strategic alignment can have on the overall performance of an organization. Now, bringing this back to PMOs, we all care about the PMO scorecard. How many projects are we delivering on time? How many are on budget? How many actually hit the business goals that we had? And my guess is that most of you are measured, at least to some degree, on that triple constraint. And again, this is data from the PMI. So projects that are well aligned with strategy are just more successful, right? And that makes sense, because if it's a really important project, if it's a project that really supports the strategy, then people get behind it, resources become available, executives stay involved and will help make decisions and will help debottleneck things, and so on, right? So it makes sense that they're more successful, because the organization wants them to be successful and is invested in making them successful. So the message from this is that at the PMO level, if you want to boost your scorecard, one of the best things you can do is to really focus on making sure that every project in your portfolio is there because it supports your strategic goals, because that's how you get the organization to support you. Now, the flip side of this is that lots of people just kind of assume that if the leadership team picks a portfolio of projects, then it must be supporting our strategy. But that's actually not true. So this is another little bit of PMI data where they say 61% of execs struggle to translate strategy into execution. I would say that the real number is probably much higher than that, right? Because it's really difficult for any one executive to control all of the resources that they need to be successful, to be totally successful. And so they're dependent on resources of other people. They're dependent on working together. And very often organizations aren't structured in a way that makes that happen. And so strategic alignment, therefore, is often an exercise in helping these executives come together to agree on what that strategy is and how they together are going to execute it, right? As a group. What is the portfolio? What's the basket of things that we're going to do, that we're going to execute to allow us to achieve our strategic goals? And so this number of 61% is probably, as I say, my experience, it's much, much higher than that, primarily because execs have a very different point of view. So let's just come back to these statistics for a second. The 20%, 50%. 20% projects are waste, 50% of projects are under-resourced. So that suggests a course of action, right? Which is if we can identify the projects down here, right? So this is good strategic fit, this is weak strategic fit, and these projects are going well and these projects are going badly. So if we can identify the projects down at the bottom here, they're the projects that we probably shouldn't be doing. Right? They're not really adding a huge amount of value to the organization. At the same time, we've got projects up here that are potentially going to fail. Right? They're projects that are important, but are not doing very well. So if we could just reallocate some of the resources, right, and move some of the resources from here, right? Kill these guys off, move the resources up here, make those projects successful, we're going to have some really happy stakeholders. So that seems really simple. It's really obvious that that's what we need to do. But there's a problem. And this is the problem, right? There's an assumption in this simple model that we know what strategic fit means. So why is that hard? Right? I mean, it's obvious. Strategic fit is strategic fit, isn't it? Yeah, but whose definition of strategic fit do we take? So this is hard because everyone around the board table, all of your major stakeholders, have been on different journeys. And some of you have probably seen this slide before, and I apologize if you have, but I do enjoy this one. So if you think about it, this guy has been on the island. He's been on the island for 3 years. He sees a boat and he goes, "Yay, boat! I can't wait to get off the island." This guy has been in this boat for a month, right? And his ship sank. He managed to get into a lifeboat, and he's drunk nothing but recycled bodily fluids for the last 3 weeks since his water ran out. And so he sees the island and he thinks, "Land, I can get off the boat. Yay, I'm saved." Now, this is the same situation. But because these people have been on different journeys, because they've got different goals, the guy on the left wants to get off the island, the guy to the right wants to get off the boat. They're looking at the same situation, but coming to absolutely opposite conclusions. And this is what happens around the board table. So if you have different executives, they have different things that are important to them because they have different roles, because they've had a different professional journey to get to where they are, because they have different personalities, because they read different newspapers this morning or heard different reports on the radio on the drive in. Right? All of these things influence the way that you make decisions. And so defining strategic, or rather using strategic fit or strategic impact, or you can call it whatever you like, to select projects is difficult because there isn't one clear definition of what good strategic fit means. So the conclusion from this is that if you want to be able to deliver strategic alignment, you have to first align the people. You have to first align those decision makers around what's important and get agreement on how to measure strategic alignment. Now, I know one or two of you on the session. I know you're really smart people. So, the logical, the rational thing to do is to jump in and say, "Well, I'll build a magic spreadsheet. We'll define a few criteria. Maybe we'll weight the criteria. Then we'll score all our projects, and we'll that'll give us a score that tells us what the strategic alignment is." So that's the right idea. That's going in the right direction. Okay, capturing criteria. Capturing the strategic goals as a set of criteria and then scoring projects, that makes sense. But what the research tells us is that trying to do that in a magic spreadsheet doesn't really work. And I'll share the why in a minute. But trying to do it in a magic spreadsheet doesn't really work. And ultimately, it can lead to a lot of frustration, because you're going to spend a lot of time in that magic spreadsheet. We've seen situations where people have spent 6 months pulling together the magic spreadsheet, scoring projects, and then presenting them back to the leadership team, and the leadership team going, "Well, that doesn't look right. This project should be down there, and that one should be up here, and this just doesn't make sense." And we actually know one guy who was fired because when somebody the senior leader challenged his magic spreadsheet, he sort of went, "Well, the numbers don't lie," and to which the response was, "Well, your numbers do." And the reason this matters is because these numbers that you create are going to be used to select the portfolio, and if they don't resonate, if they don't make sense to the executive team, they're not going to trust it. They're not going to use your tool, the magic spreadsheet, to select the portfolio. So why doesn't that spreadsheet work? Well, this is kind of one way of looking at it, one story. So if you imagine that you've got your criteria, and we're going to weight those criteria. And so the way you do that is you pull your leaders together and you ask them, what weight do you put on criteria 1? And the CEO stands up and says 23.7%. Two problems with that number. One, she just made it up. Okay, all the psychology research tells us that she just made that number up. It doesn't really mean very much at all. The second problem is that the people around the table are now not really thinking about the number. They're thinking, am I going to take on the CEO this morning? Right? Am I ready to take on the boss? And most people won't. Right? They'll just keep their heads down and keep going through the criteria and disagreeing with everything, but not really thrashing it out. So at the end of the meeting, what everybody's thinking, but nobody actually says usually, is that this model is wrong, right? That's the only thing they can agree on, is that the model's wrong. I know it's wrong because I disagreed with every step that we went through to build the model. So that's, and if the model is wrong, if your definition of strategic value, how are you going to measure strategic value, is wrong, then there's absolutely no point doing anything else. There's no point spending time scoring projects or anything else, because your foundation is faulty. And when you present the numbers, the leadership team will very quickly see that things don't line up the way they would expect them to, and they will, they'll call the emperor's new clothes, and then they'll just start trying to jam their own projects in and fighting for pet projects and things like that, which is not going to land you with a portfolio that's strategically aligned. So there is good news, there is salvation, which is that there is in fact a lot of research goes into strategic alignment and project prioritization. Here, this is one paper that was published in 2017 that actually was a review of the previous couple of decades of work on prioritization. Excuse me. And they looked at over 100 methodologies, and surprisingly, there were only 2 methods that were suitable. Suitable was the word they used in the report. One is called DEA, which is quite difficult to use. And the other method is AHP, Analytic Hierarchy Process. 1 or 2 of you, I think, know what that is already, which is great. But essentially, it's a way of structuring the conversation between the leadership team so that you get them on the same page, so that they build a definition together, collaboratively, listening to each other. They build a definition of what strategic impact or what strategic value means. So you end up with a set of weighted criteria, just as you would have done in the magic spreadsheet. The difference is that through this branch of decision science, this analytic hierarchy process, you end up with a definition that the executives buy into, and that typically gives you results that reflect the priorities that the leadership team actually has. So that's as close to true strategic alignment as you can get, right? So that's kind of the state of the art of trying to drive towards strategic alignment. So what I thought would make sense is, Dan, if we actually just looked at what that is like in the software.
Right, let's do it. Hey, everyone. So can we see the screen, Stuart?
Yes.
Is that working? Awesome. People are very polite. They just let you talk, even though you're looking at the wrong thing sometimes. So Stuart's not polite, so that's okay. Whistle stop tour. We'll start here with the criteria build. So the key when we think about strategic alignment is you might have something very strategic sounding at the top. I've got a sort of fictional car company in this particular demo. So we want to select the best R&D project. So pretty high level stuff, right, in terms of sort of large, ambitious goal. And there's many ways of thinking about this particular challenge. So I might think of it, and maybe if I'm a marketeer, it's the thought that pops into my head first about the brand support. So is this R&D going to support my brand development? I might think of it, if I go to the finance department, their first thought is this going to make us money? Is this going to be something we can put in a lot of vehicles? Is this going to be something that increases our net margin? Over in the strategy team, they're looking out at the horizon. They're looking at the longer term sort of health of the company. So they're understanding, are they building scale? Are they enabling kind of transformation towards electronic vehicles? So these real kind of key long-term trends that they've identified, are we moving the business in that direction? But then maybe we zoom back into the engineering department, and their focus is, are we going to be able to do this? Are we going to get given are we going to get told to create something ridiculously complex that's going to be virtually impossible to land well, or are we going to kind of focus on the quick wins, which we know we can execute really brilliantly? Now, take a step back and get away from the kind of the maelstrom of the political environment. You probably realise there's value in all these guys' perspective, even the finance guy. And the logic is that you then have to blend those perspectives, because actually a strong strategic aligned decision is one that looks at the opportunity from multiple different angles. And that's the key here. It's these multiple angles, these different ways of these different lenses of looking at the same broad challenge will bring much more precision to the outcome. So on that front, this is what the software is designed to do. We start to kind of add this hierarchy underneath this high level piece. And the idea is you sort of then start building underneath that and start creating measurable sort of components underneath. And I had a question earlier today of what's the right level of detail to go to? And this is very much, something that our clients will determine themselves. And you sort of trade off between precision and amount of effort. So if you have a giant model, it will take a bit of scoring. If you have a reasonably light touch model, you'll make some compromises on what you cover. But the idea is you get the right model for you in your organization that gives you a way of breaking that problem down into its component bits.
So who should own this conversation, Dan?
So this is this is, if you like, a key leadership role. So anyone who's leading any kind of transformation process, leading a planning process, anyone who's controlling a capital allocation through a budgeting cycle, people whose job it is to control the direction. So I mean, ultimately, success in this space is driven by C-suite kind of level sponsorship. So really, you want this to be the CEO's plan, his ambition or her ambition, but with the right support in place to then drive that execution. Very often the PMOs is a very simple way to answer that, but with that kind of critical high level support, the leadership team support, because you really want all the different functions kind of represented under here to feel that this is their opportunity to get their point of view across. So we build the structure. The next sort of step really is to weight the structure. So the idea is we use pairwise as a methodology in order to determine the relative importance of those different components that we've just said are the most important things to deliver our strategy. And pairwise is a sort of key component of AHP, and it's just the idea that relative importance is much easier to determine for the human brain than some sort of abstract kind of rating of this is 3.5 times more important than that, or this is worth 42% of the weight of the model. So it's a series of relatively intuitive questions that go, so what's more important? Is it brand support or financial contribution? And people can then kind of work on that. That feels tangible. You've got a very big complex problem and you've boiled it down to one reasonably simple trade-off, where as a respondent you can say that one or that one, and actually also then kind of put a weight on it in terms of that one but only a little bit. And critically, you can then stick your sort of stakeholders together in a room, and again this weighting process is something, you know, ideally is done by the really senior leaders within an organization. And where we have this trade-off, it's not one person sitting in the corner going, my thing matters more. It is about saying, well, this particular thing versus this particular thing, this component, what's the relative importance? Everybody have their say. Let's create transparency in that conversation, and then let's turn that conversation into resolution. So let's see what Ayrton Senna and Jim Clark, vintage racing car drivers, I believe, is the theme here, running our fictional car company, versus Richard Petty and Sterling Moss. So, you know, they've clearly got quite kind of polar opposite perspectives. That's fine. This may be a matter of taste. I like to think they're discussing the relative importance of Nigel Mansell's moustache at some point, you know, yes or no. And I think Stuart looked great with a moustache, by the way. Anyway, that's an aside. But this allows that conversation to really focus on the detail of the debate. People talk to people. People realize they've got different points of view, but accept and respect others' positions if they're articulated well. People listen to people and change their vote. And you end up, the key thing is, nothing is left hanging. So very often we hear kind of conflict leads to failure to resolve, leads to this kind of, this sort of slow drag. Decisions are not made because people cannot agree. Well, actually the software forces an agreement. So nothing will be held up if people have different opinions leaving the process.
And it's interesting, we very often hear comments along the lines of, you know, that was the most productive meeting, the most strategic meeting that we've had all year, because people are really listening to each other, because they have to resolve the conflict.
Exactly, and if you, I recommend if anyone follows, I think it's called Adam Grant, sort of a Wharton psychologist, is one of my favourite sort of LinkedIn people. But lots of his stuff kind of speaks to this as well, which is, do you know what? If you take conflict resolution, a lot of it is just about taking the emotion out of it, taking the heat out of it, and focusing on the topics, focusing on the detail. And actually, what you want is your executives not to be going toe to toe against each other to get their point of view across, or to get their sort of worldview kind of imposed on others. It's to break it down and to make debates rational and open. Apparently Alexa's joining in as well. And then after that process, so you go through that process throughout the entire structure of that hierarchy. And the end result is this rather nice sort of distribution that says, look, of the different kind of components within your model, this is the weight each of them now holds. And what you've actually built now is policy. So you've said that 21% of the weight of our investment, if you like, will be weighted towards winning new customers. So what you're doing is creating very transparent, tangible, measurable, usable framework against which you can then start to determine where you're going to get the best bang for your buck in terms of delivering value. And if we kind of relate that back to Stuart's kind of very high level sort of mission statements, you can't do anything with those really in terms of practical application. But this becomes very practical. So we can really see that bridge between the high level, in this case, you know, pick the best R&D stuff, and then these very specific goals that will be the outcome of investments that we choose to make. So we have a model. We've applied weights to it. We can now go through a process of scoring. So the scoring model we'll talk to you here is about collecting subjective data from multiple people. So broadly, I want to know, I've got a bunch of projects, got a load of nice ways to add projects into the software, but what we've got now is the opportunity to score them against the framework we just built. Now, one key benefit and observation we've seen with our clients here is that you get the opportunity to separate policy creation, which is the domain of the C-suite. This is the high level sort of, defining what it is we're trying to achieve, from the detail of execution, looking at specific projects, determining their specific value against those specific objectives. And invariably, I'm sure most people can relate to this, when executives get drawn into that level of detail, things go horribly wrong, because then they don't know the detail. But the problem is anything they say becomes absolute gold, becomes truth. So suddenly we're just writing roughshod over, all sorts of subject matter knowledge because the CEO says so, because the CEO wants it, because that's the way it is now, which is normally an expression of frustration that strategic alignment has failed. She's developed a strategy, but nothing's happened. So this is that opportunity to get that balance. C-suite develops a strategy, and then we score it. So in this particular example, what we can think about is having a sort of business and marketing group and an engineering group. So what we've done straight away is break those criteria into two parts, because actually the engineers aren't going to pass particularly useful comment on the potential market impact of a feature. They might have a guess, but a guess is just noise. It doesn't add value to the decision-making process. Likewise, I don't think the guy from finance is going to have a particularly useful point to say around how complex something is to create. Albeit, someone is probably going to hope it's really easy to do if it's their idea. And again, this is a truism we see across all organizations. The further you are away from the detail, the easier you think it is to do, which is a source of tremendous tension, because people don't understand why people aren't just doing that simple job that would, deliver their idea. So we have our subject matter experts diving in, and then they're able to look at the questions. And again, what we do is we say, look, for this particular project, does it reinforce the brand? On that criteria, does it deliver? And we create this kind of scale. Normally it's a 5-point scale that gives people then the opportunity to score and to put their mark down and say, yes, it's very important, critical, or it's not relevant. And you have the same process as we saw in the criteria weights. That ability to create transparency, that ability to create debate, that ability to reduce noise and grow alignment within the pool of people scoring the project. And the key thing is here, and again, I think Jodie called this out when we did the interview, it is you don't have to have people sitting through hours of meetings listening to stuff they know nothing about. You can break this up into little component bits so that the engineers talk to the other engineers about the projects they know stuff about. And then you sort of knit it together through the software. So people are only spending time really on areas where they add value. And then you're letting the software do the work of pulling together those different data points till eventually you produce a score. And basically every project ends up with a score 0 through 100, which expresses how valuable it is to delivering your goal. And then we have a sort of visualization component, which we sort of goes on top of the model, which is how you then say, look, and therefore this is what you should do, or this is how your projects perform. Now, here I'm sneaking in a bit of extra data that you capture through the process. So we want to know, as well as the value, we want to know the cost. We want to know, which department it's for, so we can start to see, have we got a balanced portfolio? So you collect extra data to enable that level of detail. And then suddenly you can produce these lovely looking graphs where you're looking at, in this case, the value versus the cost. Classic trade-off. Are these Rolls-Royce projects up here, which cost a lot, but they're really good? Are there some quick wins down here, cheap and effective? And then potentially, can we then push that into what we call the efficient frontier here, where we take that same data and look at it in ordered by value for money. So we can start to pick the best value projects first and keep going until we've run out of cash. So we can start to really know that our portfolio is optimized, to the point where you go, actually here, if I spent 46% of my potential spend of what's been asked for, I could deliver 85% of value determined by my criteria. So I know I can get a tremendous amount of bang for my buck before I need to start going back to the finance guy and asking for extra money to deliver all the things that people have asked of me. Because actually maybe here, there just isn't the level of value that warrants the amount of cash people will require to deliver.
And what's really key there, if you just go back to that for a second, Dan, is, we're talking about strategic alignment today. And so the way to think about this is, the projects at this end, they're delivering the most strategic impact per dollar, right? So if you only have a certain number of dollars or a certain number of person hours to allocate, right, the best alignment, strategic alignment you can get is to do those projects. And it's really simple and it's really clear. And it gives you that clarity over, how do we know that our resources are going to the projects that will have the most strategic impact? And this chart or the table down below, they all answer that question in slightly different ways, but every one of them is giving you a really clear indication of which projects are going to allow you to add the most strategic impact given the resources that you have. And that is strategic alignment at the end of the day.
And what I think we're just about out of time on this, but there's some nice kind of sharing functionality that's built in here. So it's not actually just a report; it's actually more of a front-end dashboard that sits on top of the product. So you can start to share out links to specific portions of your portfolio that actually then invite experts in those areas to use the data to make their own decisions and start to kind of classify the different projects and different statuses, consolidate that together, and then create, as I say, a transparent, joined-up planning process that everyone can be involved in.
Absolutely. So there's a question from Lisa, which is there a whiteboard functionality to develop these criteria and definitions in the initial phase? So the answer is that there's not really a whiteboard, but do you want to jump back to the criteria builder? So what we find works best, Lisa, is if you, as the PMO lead, and again, we're talking about strategic alignment in the context of project portfolio, so we'll assume that, right? So what we find works best is if the PMO lead does a little bit of work up front before going and sitting down with the leadership team, and comes up with some ideas based on published strategy documents, based on key performance indicators, based on looking at some of the projects that are important to the organization and asking, what's good and what's bad about that project. That's going to help you figure out, what are some of the goals and drivers that people care about. So once you've got that long list, you can then take that to the leadership team and get them to start figuring out which of those criteria really matter. And there's a bunch of research that tells us that works better than just going in with a blank sheet and asking what the criteria should be.
And we haven't quite got around to building the whiteboard functionality yet, Stuart. I actually happen to have this open, but we've got sort of criteria templates, sort of support material sitting on the website. So we've got these kind of assets available, and we're working on building more templates that would.
The key thing is that we do have this tool that lets you visualize the criteria, and if you just kind of show, don't drag and drop something to the wrong place because it'll mess up all the questions. But you can add more criteria, you can pick them up, you can drag them around, and so you can work with the leadership team to use this to structure the criteria in a way that makes sense for them. So the initial brainstorming of what's that long list, I probably wouldn't do that in this tool. You just need a whiteboard and a little bit of time. But in terms of structuring it with the leadership team and be able to drag and drop and visualize it, then this tool can be quite helpful. So as Dan rightly said, we're probably a little bit out of time. So thank you all for attending. And if you do have any questions, reach out to Dan or to me. Our details were up on that first slide, which I shall put up again. Do reach out to Dan or to me with questions, and we'd be happy to help you. In addition, there's a load of stuff on our website. There's under the resources, there's a section on strategic alignment and how to achieve that, and pointers at all kinds of blogs and resources and spreadsheet templates and all kinds of things that you can use to help you on this journey. So thank you again for joining us. And if you have any questions, do reach out directly to us, Dan or me, at transparentchoice.com.
Thank you.